Hi, welcome to Mom to Mom. My name is Carrie, and I'm a part of the Mom to Mom ministry team here at ABC. Whether this is the first time you're tuning in or you've been to Mom for a while, we're glad you're here. We meet in person the first Thursday of every month from September to May, and we'd love to have you join us. We hope you enjoy the teaching you're about to hear.
So anyway, okay, so we teased this up last month, right? We talked about, nuts and bolts is what our entire year is on, right? Based on Proverbs 3, but particularly verses 5 and 6. But today we're calling it navigating the neighborhood. And so that might take just a little bit of explanation on what that is. So I just kind of want to set the stage a little bit on that. This is Jennifer St. John. This is Gail Farrell. And they're going to introduce themselves here in just a minute. But we just want to just cover a couple quick things first to kind of help everyone understand a little bit about what we're talking about, because it seems like it could be a really broad thing. When I teased this up last month, I saw people's eyes light up. So obviously this is something that every one of us probably either are experiencing or have experienced. And so it's just this whole thought of how we interact in the different places that we find ourselves. In the cul-de-sac, with the neighbors, on the sidelines at soccer, at church in the courtyard, whatever it might be, in waiting to pick up kids, right, at school. And so we get put in these different situations with different people who maybe we know, maybe we don't know, maybe they're believers, maybe they're not believers. And the question is, how do we interact in that? Who do we want to be in that? And what do we want to be modeling for our kids? Right? Because sometimes there's just some really uncomfortable situations that can occur. It could be a neighbor. It could be a believing neighbor. But maybe they watch movies and listen to music that you wouldn't necessarily do in your home. Or maybe it's with a spouse who maybe isn't, I would say, maybe as disciplined in that area that maybe you are, or vice versa. And so maybe there's a little conflict there. Maybe, and Gail and I can speak to this, we have adult children at this point, as well as grandkids, and navigating how the adult children parent differently, right? In our families, it's a real thing. And if you had seen me an hour ago, you would know why that's a really real thing. So it's just those types of situations that you all find yourself in. So we thought it would be great to have a couple people speak into that a little bit in their different roles in life that they've had. And then we're just going to open it up for questions and go from there, okay? But there is kind of a large caveat that I want to say. First of all, boundaries are important. So I don't want you to think anything that we're speaking to today doesn't mean we need to have really good boundaries in the safety and protection of our kids. Okay, so that is always foremost. I don't believe in putting kids out there and just kind of going with it. I do think parents need to go ahead of that, okay? So just know that if we don't come back around and necessarily say it that way. All right? And the other thing is, I'm not sure, or I don't believe that there's really rights and wrongs to responses in this, other than the scriptures that talk to us about how we're to love God and love our neighbors. Okay? I think God's really clear about that. Jesus responds to that, and he's asked some questions. And he says what? You're supposed to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and what? Your neighbor as yourself. So that's foundational. You may not hear us throw out a lot of scripture at you today, but know that our responses come from that very firm foundation. Okay, even if we disagree on something, that we are still very, very solid about who God is and who Jesus is and how the Holy Spirit works. Okay, so just want to make sure you kind of understand that. And then here's a premise, and I wish this was not the premise, but it is. And that is this, that if we're not completely aligned, then we're enemies, right? That is what culture will say. If we're not completely aligned, then we're enemies. Unfortunately, we're also finding that in church, is that if you're not completely aligned, then you're enemies. But what I want you to know right now is that is purely a lie from Satan himself. Nowhere in Scripture does God ever say that people are the enemies, all right? Satan's the enemies. And if he can get you to not engage and to break apart and have self-selected huddles, then he's winning the battle. Right? And if we allow that to happen in church, in the church settings, he's really winning the battle. So we're going to call that out for the lie that it is, but it is very real, and you all know that because you're dealing with that daily in life. Okay? I want to read two quotes to you that just came along. One is by Sharon Hottie Miller. We've talked about her before and her resources. She's a pastor, but she has a PhD in theology, and she's also like all of you. She's got, she and her husband have 3 young kids, and she wrote this last week on social media. She said, "Today I had to circle back around to one of my kids and amend something I said earlier. He asked me why we don't do something that other families do, and I gave him a spiritual answer. But the truth is, it was more of a preference, and that distinction matters. Whenever we treat our personal opinions or even matters of conscience as universal spiritual guidelines, we are teaching our kids a legalism that is unbiblical, unnecessarily burdensome, and nurtures self-righteousness. I realized I had made that very mistake, so tonight I apologized and then explained that apart from sin, God gives us a lot of freedom to discern what is wise and beneficial and loving. That is also the more truthful biblical answer." I just thought that was perfect setup for what we are speaking to today. Beth Moore also said something last week which fits right in, which says, "In a culture where we've already canceled one another completely out and done immeasurable harm to innumerable people, the only sane way ahead is to learn in Christ how to treat one another with decency and dignity, even in our deep disagreement, and with the humility that ought be firmly ingrained and fully alive in each individual saved by grace. Reach deeply down for some measure of mutual compassion as fellow humans in a hateful world dying to know Jesus." All right? So here's the bottom line with all of this, is that whether you're a believer or not, God created us, and he created us in his image. And because we are image bearers, then we need to treat everyone else, whether they're a believer or not, as an image bearer. That's what we want to teach our kids. So then the question is, the nuts and bolts, how do we do that, right? There are things that press in on us. We may get to this today, we may not, but I can just throw out one word and say, let's talk about Halloween, okay? And we're going to have lots of different thoughts and opinions on that. So those are the type of things we're dealing with today, okay? Sound cool? All right, let these two, I'm going to have Gail go first, actually, and introduce herself and share a little bit, and then we'll have Jennifer share.
Okay, is that on? So I'm Gail Farrell. She asked us to give a little snippet of our family. So I'm married to Tom. If you've come within the last couple of years to ABC, then you wouldn't know that Tom was the lead pastor here at ABC for, a pastor for 37 years and a lead pastor for most of that time. So that's our life. We love ABC. But it did put us in a position of sometimes challenge and awkwardness in regard to parenting our kids. So we have 3 kids. An older daughter, Kimberly, she now has 4 boys with a set of twins. A second daughter, Stacy, who lives in Colorado, sadly, and she has 3 boys with a set of twins. And then our son, Kevin, has our only granddaughter, who's 2.5, and then they have about a 9-week-old little boy. So we have 8 grandsons and 1 granddaughter.
Wow.
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 I just say we must do boys well.
Yeah. But let me say this too. Gail was one of the women who established Mom to Mom. And so until Tom retired, she was in core ministry and did a bulk of the teaching here. So she's been stepped away from that for a little bit, but she's been a mentor mom last year and this year and then back up here, which we're so thrilled about.
I love moms, and I love the role of motherhood, and know that it's incredibly challenging, but has a lot of joys along the way as well.
Good. Hey.
I'm Jennifer St. John. I've been married to my husband, Bruce, for about 15 years. He's one of the building inspectors here for the city of Atascadero. We have 3 kids. My son, Davin, is 18. He's away at college right now.
Oh.
But he's from my previous marriage. I was married once before. And then my current husband and I have 2 little girls together, Shelby and Avila, and they are 12 and 13. And we started attending ABC about 10 years ago, right after we moved here from Bakersfield, and we were church shopping. And I've been working here for about 7 years as the bookkeeper.
Yeah. So what I would say is some of you who've been at Mom to Mom for more than a few years probably heard Jennifer's peer perspective about 5 years ago. It is still online, and I would highly recommend you go and listen to that and hear her story of how she became a single mom, and then how God redeemed that in ways that none of us could have imagined. And I know a part of her heart is in the Midwest at the moment. I have kids who went out of state to go to school too, and that's just a tough one. So,
Yeah, heartbreaking. It's bittersweet.
yeah, it is bittersweet. All right, Carrie, do you want to come up and grab the mic? I'm going to ask them a couple of questions. So what I did is I gave them questions that we may get to. We may not get to all of them, but I'm going to start us off with asking some of those to help you guys warm up a little bit. And then Carrie's going to walk around and we'll grab your questions and we'll go from there. Okay, so let's look at this question here. Gail, you can go first. Do you have a particular experience or memory that informs your parenting? In other words, something or some things that had a profound impact on the hows and whys of your parenting?
Okay, so yes and no, I would say. In a snapshot, my parents tended to parent from a position of negativity. So in other words, the first response was usually no. So if I asked to do something, it was pretty much no. But I knew that I could probably talk them into it eventually. Tom's parents parented from a position of yes. And so that took some navigating early on, but we came to the conclusion, and I began to see the wisdom in trying to parent from a perspective of yes. And so it's not really just one moment, but it's kind of the combining of two different, evaluating basically our parents' parenting styles and deciding on what we felt like would be most effective. And I'll probably be able to elaborate later, but in case I can't, the reason why I think it's so important to do that, when possible, and obviously you can't always, but because then it gives your no's a lot more power.
Yeah.
And you save the no for when you really mean it, and it's a black and white for you as a family, whether it's specifically, a biblical issue or just something that you feel like is just something that you won't give in on because it's that essential to your values, your family values. But it gives your no a lot more power, and it's a lot easier to stick with it if you try to say yes.
Excellent. How about you on that? What was your...
For me, it was my childhood. Some of my memories of my childhood caused me to want to do some things differently. Growing up, my parents believed in God, but we never attended a church. I knew when I was in my late teens that I wanted to go to church and someday raise my own kids in a church. And I desired what I would call Christian values. My dad died when I was 14. And my childhood home felt a bit unstable and unsafe at times. And that caused me to want to have a safe home for my family. And once I began attending a church, I felt like it was a place of safety to me, so that was important. Also, a very particular experience that affects my parenting is my divorce. My current husband and I have very different parenting roles when it comes to my son. Since his biological dad is in the picture and had 50% custody of him pretty much his whole life, we have different parenting roles. My husband does not discipline my son unless it's a direct offense against him. For example, if he were to talk back or roll his eyes, then my husband would address it. But if it was something that happened at school or a call from a teacher or just arguing with siblings, I handled all of that because I didn't want to have any resentment created between them. That was very, very important to me in their relationship. Step parenting can be tricky, and we had to set up guidelines so that we were both on the same page from the time my son was very young. So their bond is that they mostly have fun together. They work with power tools together and talk about soccer, since my son has played soccer his whole life and plays in college. That's their common ground.
Yeah, that is so wise. And that leads actually into wanting to say, we have several of you that are in blended families. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that you don't necessarily have your child or children all the time. And particularly if you've had a former spouse who's remarried, and that might be a good relationship for you. It may not be a good relationship for you. That is very challenging to navigate that. And those are the things that we're looking at. We have several of you who are single moms. So then those brings up a whole other side of questions too, as particularly, I think, navigating the neighborhood. I think that's a little challenging when you're a single mom. So yeah, your perspective on that. So for me, it's not actually necessarily a parenting thing. I could speak to that, but I was telling the gals earlier in the week, my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer right after David and I got married. And he went home to the Lord 15 months later. And my mom was just one of these gals super involved in life and in a variety of things, not only church and serving others, but in music and in the community and in the arts. And when he was diagnosed with that cancer, I watched her put a stop to it all. She has put it all, and it was all focused on what his needs and cares were going forth until he went home. And then she gradually stepped back into those things. But it's a core memory for me of how to love and care for someone, whether that be your kids or your parents or your spouse. So that's one of the ones for me. But Carrie, let's go ahead and see if you all have some questions. We have some other ones we can go to in a little bit, but I want to see what you guys had questions about. This is for you. So if you have one, just raise your hand and we'll jump on it. If you don't, it's all good. Here we go.
For the recording, it would be good to have.
Thank you. How do you deal with a disagreement between you and your husband when you don't see eye to eye on parenting, as far as like a particular situation when your husband wants to take it to the extreme, but you don't feel like you should take it to the extreme, and like trying to find the balance, but also trying to respect your husband's opinion? That seems to be like a point of contention with teenagers right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And did you just say with teenagers?
Yes.
Okay, so with olders. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think for me, the primary portion of that answer would be to try to have united front in front of the kids. So, and that's difficult, but even if it means you're in the heat of the moment and there's a disagreement, to just be able to politely and respectfully say, you know, would we be able to talk about this for a moment? And step into a different room. Hopefully your husband would be willing to go along with that. But yeah, I think that you want to try to present a united front whenever possible, but that's obviously challenging if you're really on different ends of the spectrum.
Jennifer, you have a thought on that?
Yeah, so if you're in the heat of the moment and that happens in front of your kids, my husband and I will sometimes look at our kids and just say, Mommy, Daddy need to take a break, or we need to talk about this, and we'll come back later. And we may not be able to talk about it that night if it's heated or if we don't have time, but we say, let's make an appointment together, even if it's in a week. And then we have guidelines when we have serious talks about how we go about that. We have the Bible. We can stop and hold hands and pray at any time if it's a serious topic. So it's just whatever rules and guidelines would work for you, but we have rules and guidelines that we have in our marriage, and we have serious discussions about kids, money, things that are important.
We thought we had those discussions, but then when the moment comes up, and you step away from it later, we just find ourselves in complete disagreement, even though we had discussed how we would respond to a situation. And then I mean, I've changed a little bit on my perspective of how I thought I would respond to it.
Yeah.
But he hasn't, so it's just hard to try and find the common ground and parent from the same spot.
Yeah, and then I guess I'm wondering if it really is parenting from the same spot, because in that situation, God is going to use both of you to give perspective to that. I think like with David and I, so I'm the one who can see present but also see down the road.
Right.
So I'm like, yeah, but if we do this here, then this is probably the next step, and then this and this and this and this. And David is very much like right here.
Yeah.
Right, he doesn't, that's not his strength, looking that way. And so for those situations where I would find it with David, it wasn't even so much with teenagers as it was with a little younger, of him saying no to things. And I would kind of have to get in his vision and say, let's go chat for a second. Why are you saying no? Yeah. And most of the times, because he was. It was like, no. That yes. No, that's not going to fly. There needs to be a reason behind that no. And if it's no, I will totally support you on that. But what's your why on that? Well, because of this and that. Oh, okay, I can go with that. Or if it's not, I will say, this needs to be a yes, and this is why. Or vice versa. It's that. And so I think one of the things I've been talking a lot with my kids about recently, and things that we've been addressing, is that we all sit around the same table, but we all have a different perspective because of where we're sitting at that table. And that's all very valuable. And I think that's how God plans it. But your husband is going to have a different perspective because he's not sitting in your seat. So I think the best that you can to halt and have a discussion and know his why of why are you not giving on this? Why, if you can't do some convincing in that to get a broader perspective, then ask yourself, is this something I can let go of? And if it's health and safety, no. You guys got to figure that out.
The other thing I would encourage is to, so we tried to hold the reins real tight when our kids were little and then gradually be releasing them. And so to bring in the perspective, especially with teenagers, is, well, okay, I get it that you're feeling strongly about this right now, but we have to remember that 3 years from now, or depending on their age, if they're a 14, 15-year-old, or however many years from now, he or she's going to be making every decision potentially on their own. We have to give them some opportunity to make the decisions now and perhaps make decisions that we disagree with, but while they're in our home and under the safety net of us. Is this something that we need to let go of and let them make a decision to be preparing them for the future? And it might be a yes to that, it might be a no. And then also you might be able to respectfully say, you know what, I just disagree with you on this. And honestly, I'm the one who is typically more involved with and navigating the kids' situations. Is this something that you would be willing to trust me on, even though we have a differing perspective? And that's being respectful to him. He may say no, but those would be things I would try.
Yeah, please do. No, that's fine.
I think also just something that I don't have teenagers yet, but use this. Okay, sorry. Is sometimes bringing a third party in. So I know like we'll seek like either the church's advice, like pastoral advice, or our accountability partners or whoever that is, someone, or your mentor moms, or just someone you can meet with to maybe get a different perspective. Maybe you're not hearing your husband or he's not hearing you, and so that's been something that's been helpful for us.
That's a great idea.
And making sure that the kids know that he is the leader of your household. Don't demeanor him in front of them. It's like you can take him aside, and even in front of him you can sweet talk him as well down and stuff. But just kind of twist your words a little bit and lay hands on him and pray over him and love on him, and then he will come your way a little bit more. Get up to use your chair because I'm old, I can't.
Okay, Carrie. Is there another question before we go off the list here a little bit? Okay, how about this? I asked you about what's one truth that undergirds close friendships. So this, for you guys, so this is more where you have those close friendships, so you're living in close community somehow with someone who knows you pretty well, knows your kids pretty well. You're probably disciplining your kids in front of them without much thought to it. You know what I mean? There's a comfort level there. Is there something that girds that friendship for you?
Yeah, I may have answered this a little bit differently.
No,
but,
it's okay.
I feel like one truth for me, it's like an anchor with my friends, is unconditional love. Like unconditional friendship. I have some really close friends that are like sisters. Some are strong Christians, some are not. We might have different morals and values, but some of us have known each other since high school. But the anchor in all of them is unconditional love and fun, being open-minded enough to let my good friends tell me the truth and love, and vice versa. If it's a friendship I really value, I really try and stick by them through thick and thin through life. Also being open to learning, realizing over time that it's okay to have friends that are different than me, that have different values or aren't living like me, as long as they don't drag me down. But it's also very important to have one or two close friends who are strong in the Lord and who can be trusted prayer partners when you need to call that person and say, I need prayer right now. And we have fun. I mean, we laugh our butts off till we can't breathe. We have a great time together. I really try to work at my friendships. It doesn't mean that I have to get together with them every week or every month. We just pick up where we left off. I've always felt like that God put us here on this temporary layover on earth to bring him glory, but to also have fun. And friendship is a big part of that.
Mm-hmm. Good, that's good. Gail?
Yeah, ditto. I would agree with everything Jen just said. And then I just think confidentiality is super important to a relationship. And for somebody to know that if they tell me something, and particularly if they specify that it's confidential, or if I'm unsure, I'll often ask, and then just have it be your word that you just won't share that with anyone else, including your spouse. And I feel strongly about that. Some people would disagree. I don't at all believe in secrets between my husband and I as far as something that I'm hiding from him. But if it's something confidential in the life of someone else and he doesn't need to know that, then I think it's appropriate not to share that. And I know there's people who disagree with that, but I think confidentiality is super important. And probably part of that came just even from my role in the church as well. But I think people just have to know that we're there for them, and it's not going to go any further if they don't want it to.
And I can take that a little step further. Those of you I get to meet with know this, but this is how I handled that. If you're telling me something, then you're telling my husband. But that doesn't mean that I'm turning around and telling my husband. That means if he were to ask, hey, is so-and-so okay, or whatever, that I am going to answer him in that. And the same when I'm talking with you, if I'm sharing something with you and your spouse asks you about that, then it's okay for you to share that with them, because I'm not going to get in between the two of you on that. Does that make sense? And again, people may disagree with it. And I can only think of twice, actually, where my husband has asked me. And one was actually only a couple years ago, and it had to do with the safety of one of the gals. And he was like, do I need to go over to the house? And it's like, well, yeah, we're going to, so you understand? Sometimes those types of things happen too. I would just be interested to know, and you don't have to raise your hand, but I'd be interested, how many of you have some pretty close friendships of people who aren't believers? Oh, good. That's excellent. That's excellent. I'd be interested just to pick your brains about how that relationship works for all of you, and because I think that's where some of the questions are too. Okay, is there another question from out here?
Okay, so I know all three of you had kids that went through public school. How do we encourage our kids to pick friends that are like-minded but yet be lights on their campus?
So I don't encourage my friends to pick friends that are like-minded. I encourage my friends just to really see if they're a nice person. Look at their heart. Is it somebody you get along with? That's what we do. And then if along the way they find out their parents don't believe or they don't believe, invite them to youth group. Use it as an opportunity. I tell my kids that school is your mission field. And so, we can't just be friends with Christians, because then we're not really giving ourselves, we're kind of robbing ourselves of the opportunity. There are a lot of really great people out there. Both my girls have 2 or 3, what they would call their besties, that their parents aren't walking with the Lord, and one of them tells their daughter that they came from apes. And that's okay. We still hang out with them. We love them. They come to church with us on Christmas Eve. They've come and done church events, but it's not my job and her job to convert them. They're just inviting them. That's what we can do. Well, that's kind of how we handle it.
Yeah. Gail?
Yeah, and yet I very much understand that who our kids choose as friends often has a large say in who they grow up to be. So the old analogy of it's much easier for someone that's down low to pull somebody down to their level than it is for someone to pull someone up to their level. So I understand, totally what you're saying, Nicole, and that we want our kids, though, to have solid friendships with like-minded or even other believers. Whoops. Although I would totally agree with Jen that, we do want them to have some friendships that are with non-Christians, but it matters who your kids hang out with. So I just think having conversation, with your kids and or maybe it's a little bit more open if they're wanting to go to play at somebody's house where we know their family and we know that they have similar beliefs as we do, as opposed to someone who you don't know so well and you're not sure what's going on or are concerned about what's going on in their home. And just, having candid conversations that say, they have different rules in their family, and that doesn't mean that their family's bad, but it's just not things that our family is comfortable with or where we want you to be hanging out. So we're going to choose to spend, time with a different set of friends or something to that effect.
For me, the limit on that was not going over to spending time at somebody else's house if they were not believers, number one. And two, even if they are believers, we needed to know that family fairly well, okay? And there's obvious reasons for all of that. However, we did have our kids in public school and a public cul-de-sac where everybody came and hung out. And so here's the thing with kids, is they need to see what you're doing. Now, I know you, Nicole, so I know you have friends on all different levels. So your kids are observing you in those situations, and I think that's really key, of how are you engaging with them? What type of activities are you doing with them? Because that's what they're going to emulate doing, and that ongoing conversations with them. Because the kids, particularly the young elementary, they're the ones who throw us under the bus, right? Because they're going to go to the neighbor kid and say, you know, my mommy said you're going straight to hell because you watched that movie, right? Right? Isn't it stuff like that? Let's be honest. It's like, man, you have no filter. That's not exactly what I said. But you know what I mean? That's the uncomfortable area where we find ourselves. And so I think just continuing to show that to them and then talking to them about what Gail just said, the differences, why we do what we do. And that's what Sharon Hoddy Miller was saying, is that she was saying kind of a hard no to something and realized, oh, that's just a preference. I was wrong. But this is why we do it. Now, I could throw out Halloween right now and have that conversation. If you guys want to have that conversation, you need to raise your hand and ask it. But this is one of those things where continue, to me, where it starts to get even dicier as the older they get. And I agree that who they're hanging around with is going to influence. So, does that help?
You know,
We got two questions.
okay, just real quick. I can think of a situation with our middle daughter who was a very black and white person. And so we had a certain set of guidelines in our family as far as movies that we watched or those kinds of things. And there was a time when she was probably in middle school, upper elementary to middle school, and I got a phone call. She was doing a sleepover at a good friend, a family who attended church's house, etc., and said, Mom, they're watching this movie, and I don't think you would let me watch that. You know, what should I do? And so, there was a lot of commendation there for, thank you so much for being so trustworthy, and I'm so glad that, you know, you want to be obedient in this situation. You're right, that's probably not something that we would choose at home, but I also didn't want her to be alienated from a bunch of her friends. There were several girls over there that night, and so I said, it wasn't a horrible movie, but I don't even know what it was rated, but, you know, yeah, you're right, we probably wouldn't make that choice, but go ahead. Thank you for letting us know. You may watch it, but if you become real uncomfortable, just choose to leave the room. And you don't say I'm not allowed or this isn't right, but just choose to leave the room. You know, so we would make some exceptions at times, especially as they got older, based on their knowledge, their understanding, and just, life.
You know, Heidi had a question here. Sorry. And then Tiffany had one too.
And just to touch on that, I think for the olders, I think I'm the mom who has a big car, and the conversations and the music and the things we have in our car, oh my goodness, like you can just be quiet and listen to their conversations, and your homies are amazing, or like we need to have a conversation about, you know, that sort of thing. But when you're the house that they're coming over, when you're the car, when you're driving them around, I think that really, really helps to see who they're choosing or what's around, so you can either redirect, because when they're older, they're not gonna, hey mom, can you set up a play date? Like those days are over. So now they're choosing who their friends are, so we just have to kind of be the mom that it's always about, like, I have the junk food, like come over, or I have the biggest car, come right in my car. I think that really helps, so we can see like kind of what they're around, or redirect, or like encourage. So I think that's super important to kind of, because they're not going to be open, so you have to kind of be around to see.
And I think one more thing I would say to your child, you know, you want them to look for certain attributes in other people and qualities in other people. And if there's a child that's not exhibiting that, if it's me, I'm looking at the parent and seeing what's going on in that family. I'm not going to take it out with the kid. And what does that parent possibly need from me as a parent? And if I have time, I'm going to tell a story that happened in our life about that very thing. So.
Oh, I just want to vote for Halloween conversation.
Oh, okay. So now I'm going to kick the hornet's nest because, all right, so those of you who maybe don't attend Atascadero Bible Church here, so before Jeff started in on his sermon on Sunday, or maybe you guys were up at Hume and didn't hear it, he just gave a little blurb about Trunk or Treat and just a little heart behind why we are partnering with 3 or 4 other churches in doing that down in Sunken Gardens. And so I'm listening to that, and I went, oh, because I was going to talk about this on today. And I said, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to talk about this? Because I'm just going to be really honest. I hold a different view from what our church leadership is choosing on this particular topic, okay? I don't support Halloween. And if you want to talk more about that, please reach out to me. I will tell you exactly what I think and feel about that and why. But this is where it ran up to me as a parent. So we moved into a neighborhood. I was pregnant with our youngest, so my kids were like 6, 4, and 2. And unbeknownst to me, it was the neighborhood in San Luis where everybody celebrated everything, and in our cul-de-sac. And so Halloween was huge. People bust people in no joke, to the neighborhood. And so I got thrust into, I'm fine with Harvest Festival and celebrating the goodness of God through the harvest, but now I'm like, oh great, what am I going to do? When am I going to do? And so I had to accommodate a little bit for that. No joke, we gave out 1 piece of candy to a person, and we would go through 1,000 to 1,200 pieces of candy a night. It was a huge deal. And so kind of what we did in our neighborhood, we ended up just being out front. Everybody would be out front. We would be doing dinner and everything out front. And so we were engaging with the neighborhood, but I wasn't trying to really engage with what it was that was being honored and celebrated. So that's a real challenge, right? You all find yourself in that. But then now I've got adult children, and I have grandkids. And I am not on the same page with them on this particular holiday. So that puts me in a little bit of a quandary on how best to support them, particularly when I have grandkids who want to talk to me all about it, right? That, and then on the church level, right? So they're making a different decision than I would make. And if I was in the room, I would share with them why I don't think this is something we should necessarily be doing as a church. Is it okay to have all those tensions? It is. Are there really clear-cut answers? Well, if you talk to me, I'm going to tell you there are. But other people sit at a different place around that table and have a little different perspective about that. So I think the best about that is to just have some communication, open communication with that, with your spouse. You need to make a decision for your family. That's it. And if you have places of influence, some of you are in charge of ministries, then you get to speak into that a little bit. But I could have someone sitting right next to me give a totally opposite thing. So that's where I happen to sit with it, and I find myself challenged every year. And I'll just be honest with you, I love the fall. I do not like Halloween. I wish I could jump over it. I do like the candy treats, though. Those are a good thing.
I think the thing I want to be sure and touch on that I felt was so important, and we really tried to do in our home, was establish a relationship with our kids to where they knew that there was nothing they could ever do that would cause us to not love them, and that it was safe to tell us anything. And that's something I think we probably all desire, but that's a hard place to reach. And I think it starts when your kids are really young. Listening, I know they drive us crazy at times, but just as much as we can to try to listen and let them know that we're hearing them, to want to be involved in and hear, what was good today, what was bad today, just conversations like that around the table. But as they get older and they start making decisions or choices or disobeying and then are, confessing those things to you, I think doesn't mean that there's not going to be discipline or consequences, but just making it safe for them to tell you what they did. I said one time I was doing a talk at Mom to Mom on communicating with your kids, and I said something about learn to have a good poker face. I mean, they might say something that absolutely either shocks you, disappoints you, upsets you, angers you, whatever it is, and in the moment, just try to not overreact and maybe not even make it seem like it's a big deal, whether they're talking to you about sex or what their friends at school or what they overheard somebody say on the bus or whatever it might be. Because if they feel like it's just like, oh my goodness, they're gonna freak out, I'm never gonna tell them anything again. That's not where you wanna be. I can remember when one of our kids one time as a teenager, Tom and I were gone, the house was empty, and I'm working hard here to not say genders, but one of the kids chose to have someone of the opposite sex over when no one else was home. And that was just a hard and fast rule that wasn't going to happen in our home. That child later confessed and let us know that there was a very guilty conscience happening there. But they knew that they could tell us. And we then had a pretty candid conversation, and we were able to deal with the matter from there. But they knew that they could come to us and tell us that. And I just want to encourage you, that's the environment you want to be creating in your home. Not at all to say that we did it perfect all the time. That's for sure we didn't. But that's where you want to be. And then even that extends to when your family does something different than other people's, than other kids' families. You can just explain, well, that just doesn't work for us in our home. But that doesn't mean that that's not a good home or that they're bad parents. It just means that they have different rule or maybe a slightly different value. And then that gives you an opportunity to have a great discussion on that.
Two questions I want to get to before we wrap up here. I want to ask you in particular, so I know of your relationship with your ex-husband. Can you talk into that a little bit? Because you've had to co-parent not only as you got remarried, but also in that. And what are just some things that you've just tried to remember in that parenting of your son, and how you were communicating, or how best to do that?
Okay, so my situation was probably a little bit different, getting divorced. It was kind of rocky for the first couple of years after the divorce. He kind of went on a journey of different heartaches and partying. We lived in Vegas, and he had 50-50 custody. So my son was going back between California and Nevada, so that was hard. But we finally got to a place where, fortunately in his situation, God did a mighty work in his heart, and he gave his life to the Lord. So we had that common ground at that point. Around that time, the Lord brought me my husband, so there was all these different dynamics. A few years after that, the Lord brought my ex-husband a Christian spouse. She's amazing. And so at that point, because we were all walking with the Lord, it was, okay, let's sit down. Let's meet at somebody's house. Let's talk. We had very open lines of communication. We all had the same moral values at that point. It was relatively easy for us. I don't know why that happened to us. I always like to give a disclaimer that I don't want to glorify divorce or make you guys think that this could happen for you if you're having trouble in your marriage, because I don't know anybody else that this has happened to. So don't think if you're having trouble, you can just walk out and get divorced. I don't know of anybody else in my situation, honestly. But from that point on, we had meetings. We would talk. We would do FaceTime calls. We would make sure that we were on the same page. And it changes, like you guys know, every year, from year to year, as your kids change, the rules might change. You want to give them more freedom as they get older, as teenagers, because you want them to be able to make mistakes while they're under your roof, so you can coach that. So you don't want to shelter them to the point to where when they're 18 and moved out or away at college, then they go crazy. So we just reevaluated every year, and it just, God made beauty from ashes. He really did. And to the point where my ex-husband and his wife asked us to be the godparents of their two boys that they have together. So it was just, we had that situation, a very open line of communication, and we involved my son in it. Like, hey, you've got two sets of parents who love you and are looking out for you, and come to us with anything. Like Gail said, you want to create that, foster that environment of, if you hear things at school or, the first time, I just tried to really tell them, come ask me questions. I want you to hear the truth from me. I'll never forget the first time he came home and said, Mommy, what's pole dancing? Because and I, what?
What in the world?
Poker face.
Poker face, yeah. Poker face. Well, it was like in fourth grade, too. So, so it's just all of us being on the same page. And then when I get those tough questions, I would shoot a text to his dad and stepmom and say, hey, Davin asked me this. I just want to let you know this is the new stage we're in. These are the kind of questions that are coming. So things like that, just being very open.
That's excellent. Gail, I want to ask you one question, and then we'll get you to your table talk time. So you had a really unique role here, a really hard role. And I am sure there were plenty of times when people would come up against you in judgment on maybe things you were doing or allowing or not allowing for your kids. So what's kind of the internal process that you would go through in this case, dealing with a believer, to walk yourself through with the Lord on a tough one?
So fortunately, my husband Tom is a pretty strong person and a strong leader, but was able to impart some. So he entrusted me basically with the primary raising of our kids. So he would often defer to me, but yet at times he had some really strong thoughts on things, which was very helpful. And so in regard to that kind of thing, living in a fishbowl and having people aware of and seeing and judging the decisions that we would make, he just said, you know what, I don't care. We are going to make decisions that we feel are in the best interest of each child at that particular stage and season of their life. It might differ from one child to another even, depending on their maturity or their choice of friends or whatever it might be. But we're going to make the best decision for our kids, and if somebody doesn't like it, oh well. And I was able to gain courage from that because that wouldn't typically be necessarily my perspective or my personality, would be a better way to say it. So, example, when our oldest daughter, Kimberly, was in junior high, it was then not middle school, and in 7th grade, she wanted to go to a 7th grade dance. And ABC was significantly smaller and yet still pretty large, but so people just knew who we were and who our kids were. And so there was some pressure because some parents just didn't like the whole school dance environment. And we just said, you know what? We had a good talk with her beforehand. We explained some of the things that we felt like may not be transpiring that we would necessarily like or be in favor of, and yet we didn't want to rob her of different experiences. She had a great friend group, and so we chose to let her go. And there were some other parents that were pretty unhappy with that decision. But that was something that our kids knew that we loved them and that they came before church. So in our own personal relationships, the Lord's first, my husband is second, then my kids, and then ministry in the church. And our kids knew that. And so so in times when we did say no, but we had a real perspective that we didn't want them to ever be bitter towards the Lord, towards church, but more importantly towards the Lord. And so we didn't want to make decisions based on what other people thought, but what we thought was in their best interest, and kind of just we would take the fall if somebody didn't like it.
That's excellent. And so that leads into what I would leave you with today is Psalm 139. Read through that, pray through that. It's an excellent psalm to kind of just put all these things in perspective and talk to the Lord about. But the very last verse of it says, Psalm 139:23, search me, O God, know my heart, test me and know my concerns, see if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way, right? That's really the bottom line to all of that, and that's exactly what both of them just said to that. So, all right, you're going to have about 15... What? I see Raina. Oh, I'm sorry. We can.
No, we totally can.
No, we got time.
This is kind of maybe a layup question, but it also does kind of go deep. So the very first thing I thought of when you said navigating the neighborhood is homelessness. So I feel like every family has different approaches to how do they discuss wealth and, as a mother, I'm keeping my kids safe. That's important. But as a Christian, I also see our neighborhood and our community. And anyway, that's why I was saying we don't have to ask this question, because I feel like it's kind of, it can go a lot of different ways. But I was just interested in knowing how you all navigated that as moms with young kids. And then, speaking about just we as image bearers, we see others as image bearers. And it's really important to me that my kids are compassionate, but there's also the health and safety aspect. So I thought you might have some perspective.
Yeah, well, I had that actually come up when my kids were young, because we were in San Luis, as you guys know, and at the school that we were at for elementary school, there was a care center and a counseling center there for kids whose parents were incarcerated. So all those kids were, regardless of where they lived, were in our elementary school, and then they would be walked up to this counseling and care center. It would have great opportunities for them. But it changed the classroom, right? Because there were not parents there to parent them. And that's, again, that whole thing of a lot of them were homeless and living in shelters as well because of that. And so it was an opportunity for me, from not only as a Christian woman, to be able to minister to those kids and love on them, but have those conversations at home with my kid. Hey, you know so-and-so in class, well, yeah, his mom and dad are incarcerated, and so this is what this means. So this is how we help him at school. This is how Mrs. Brown loves on him in class. This is how, so that was that aspect of it. The other aspect was we would just keep in the car. I would put them in Ziploc bags where I put just some necessities, some gift cards to some of the fast food places, as well as a little bit of cash. And if we would see somebody along the side of a road or something, we would stop, but I would not get my kids out. I will get out with the doors locked, because I'm sorry, there's just, you have to be careful in those situations. So they saw it that way. We would do that for that. And then up here, we're seeing it, but as older kids, and seeing the drug deals and the pimping that's going on right in front of us, in front of Vons and some of the other places. And a lot of that is a safety thing, but continuing to talk about ways that we could help, and ways that we do help that may not be always direct conversation. Sometimes it is, but there are plenty of ways. I've had people approach me at Vons in the parking lot, and if they ask me for cash and stuff, we'll talk about that a little bit. But if I have grandkids with me, that's a whole different way of responding. So.
And I would just say, I think it's great to, either have a gift card or something to that effect. Although things have changed a lot in just the last few years. There's people everywhere. I personally will never give cash, because I think that's pretty much always going to just go to alcohol, drugs, or cigarettes. So that's where I draw a line. And then we choose to support ECHO, and that's our way of helping, homeless people. And so those are the conversations that I would be having with my kids and grandkids, not kids now, but, and just sometimes people are in these places because they've made really bad decisions, and, they do have issues, substance abuse issues. I couldn't think of the right word, but yeah. So I think you want to have a heart of compassion, but you also have to be wise, and you also want to not encourage more panhandling on the streets. So I personally am really opposed to giving cash, because I think it does just encourage that.
Does that help? Okay.